When I was growing up, we have family routine on Sunday mornings. And as we were getting ready to go to church, breakfast on Sunday morning was always canned cinnamon rolls. And as a result, I love canned cinnamon rolls. They're fantastic. Would anybody like a cinnamon roll this morning? Oh, very nice. Okay. Can take one. Very good. Would you like one? No? All right. I saw some other hands. Who would like other? All right. Well. Okay. Go. There you go. You can have it. All right. You got to take it before Christmas. All right. Thank you. All right. So who else wanted one over here? I see somebody want one. Good. You see, you brought these in this morning. I'm glad you didn't. You can get one now, Anthony. Okay. Very good. Y'all are doing well. Who else want? Anybody else over here want one? Anybody want some roll? Yeah, she does. Of course. Not the middle one. That's my favorite. Anybody else got one? Cinnamon roll. I love cinnamon roll. The thing that was really bad in the family when I was growing up is there was only 8 cinnamon rolls. There was 4 of us. So you only got 2, and I hated that. I got 2 left. Speaking of 2, anybody want one? Yeah, you went to Orange this week. That's good. Another one? Got 1 left. 1 left. Y'all going to share? Very nice. Very nice. Yeah, you should take the whole thing. There we go. You can give that plate back to my wife. When we would have those cinnamon rolls on Sunday morning, and I only got 2. And I remember the first time I got to eat the whole can. And it was great. And then after I got married and we were going to have our own cinnamon roll tradition, I didn't get the off-brand cinnamon rolls like my mom always got. And my mom's going to listen to this later in the week. So, Mom, I don't know what was... You could have come off the extra 30 cents and got the Pillsbury. And so we got the Pillsbury one. That rocked my world. That was like, oh, my goodness. These are so much better. I love cinnamon rolls so much, I have a tendency. And one tendency would be to eat them a lot. The other tendency is I like to keep my cinnamon rolls to myself. I don't necessarily like to share them. Now, obviously, this morning I shared my cinnamon rolls. Now, can anybody find any flaws in me sharing the cinnamon rolls this morning? This is group conversation, but just shout it out. Not enough. So some of you are panicking. I cannot believe he's only got 8 cinnamon rolls. There's no way everybody in here can get one. So I can't even believe that he's doing this. So there was not enough. What's another flaw? They're not the grande ones, all right? They're not the kind you specifically like. Okay, that's perfect. What was another flaw? It's fattening, so it's not healthy. There was nothing left for me. It's not from scratch. Miss Mary, did I mention I really love cinnamon rolls? Okay. That was a hint. No milk. Yes, there's no milk. There's all kind of flaws with the thing that I did this morning with cinnamon rolls. We have tendency to do all kinds of flaws as human beings. We're looking at this event that happened early in the life of Jesus, and it's found in Luke chapter 4, and we're looking at we've been looking at verses 40 through verse 44. We're just going to look at one of those verses again this morning. And the first week that we looked at this, we looked at what did Jesus do? And we saw that Jesus helped, so that reminds us that we should help. We saw that Jesus retreated, so that reminds us that we need to retreat. We saw that Jesus said no even to good things, so we need to learn how to say no even to good things. And we learned that Jesus stayed on mission. And if I'm going to be successful, I've got to follow Jesus. And there are 4 very practical ways that we could see to follow Jesus. Then we started looking at the human side of the story. And here's what the story is, basically. Jesus is in the town of Capernaum, and he heals Peter's mother-in-law. So word gets out that Jesus is healing and healing people of their sickness. So at the end of the day, when Sabbath was over, all of the town started bringing all of their sick people and their sick family members to Jesus. And the scripture says that Jesus healed every one of them. That when he touched them, that they were healed. Well, after that busy night of healing people, Jesus retreated. And the next morning, the town couldn't find him, so they searched and searched and searched for him. And once they found him, They begged him to stay. And Jesus said, no, I can't stay. I've got to go preach the good news of the kingdom of God to other places. We have a tendency to do some things. And last week what we looked at from the human side is we have a tendency to only be focused on our immediate physical needs. Flaw with the cinnamon rolls this morning, they weren't grands. There wasn't enough. In other words, when you said there wasn't enough, what you're really saying is, I didn't get one, right? I mean, this is really what you're saying when we do that. And so we have this tendency to want to focus on our immediate physical needs. We talked about that last week, and if you weren't here, you can go back and watch that on the webpage. Today, we're going to look at a second tendency that we have. And that tendency is to keep Jesus to ourselves. To keep Jesus to ourselves. This is what the verse says. The verse says in chapter 4, verse 32, it says, early the next morning, Jesus went out to an isolated place. The crowd searched everywhere for him, and when they finally found him, they begged him not to leave them. They begged him not to leave them. Now, we are selfish by nature. Nobody has to teach us how to be selfish. Nobody has to teach us how to look out for number one, and I'm number one, and you're number one in your world. This is just part of who we are. This is part of how we're wired. So sometimes, or most of the time, when we experience something really good, we kind of want to keep it to ourselves. And we have this tendency when it comes to our faith, when it comes to our relationship with God, and it comes to our relationship with our church, is that we tend to not want to share it. We tend to not want to let other people be involved with it. We tend to keep Jesus to ourselves. Now, this happens in a couple of different ways. This happens personally, and it happens corporately. And I'll explain what I mean by corporately in just a minute. Personally, for those of us that have a relationship with Jesus, for those of us that are Christians, we have a walk with God. We're trying to understand what it means to live the Christian life. What we will find ourselves doing if we're not real careful is we'll keep that to ourselves. I mean, what are the two things you never talk about with someone? Politics and religion, right? And so it's very easy for us to keep this to ourselves. It's like my personal faith. It's a private thing. It's not really something that I want to discuss with someone. Because it can be a little bit awkward to share your faith, to talk about what you believe in God. It's a little bit awkward to try to hand out 8 cinnamon rolls to a room full of way more than 8 people. I did notice that you didn't have any problems taking them. But sharing our faith can be like that. It is a difficult thing to do because there's so many reasons with that. But we tend to keep Jesus to ourselves personally. We also tend to keep Jesus to ourselves corporately. When it comes to church, when it comes to this organization or this thing that we call church, we tend to not necessarily let people know about our church. We tend to not go the extra step to invite people to our church. Because we just kind of we tend to keep it to ourselves. And we're going to talk about some of the reasons that we might do that in just a few minutes. But before we do that, before I really want to talk about, not necessarily, we're going to talk a little bit about the personal side of that. We're going to talk a little bit about the corporate part of that, but mainly probably more about the corporate than the personal this morning. And what I mean by corporate is all of us that are gathered in the room this morning, all of us that are listening to this. Here's an important statement. Church is not only for us. Church is not only for us. So there's a couple of words in this statement that I want us to focus in on this morning. The first word I want us to focus on is the word church. Now, we talk about this often because we need to get this. And the reason that we need to get this is because our language and our terminology does not fit what we know to be the tradition or to be the truth. Because somebody somewhere in a family this morning said, "Are we going to church today?" You may even thought, "Well, I'm on my way to church." Or, "What time are we leaving for church?" I mean, we say these kinds of things all of the time. And church is not a place. Church is not a destination. Even though our language says it's a destination and a place all the time, it is not. It is not a destination. It is not a place. It is not an organization. It is not a corporation. Let me tell you one of the things that makes me cringe top 3 things that makes me cringe the most as a pastor is when one of you calls this my church. like Marty, you're talking to me and you say, well, your church is doing really well. And I'm like, ooh, that's not my church. In fact, it's not your church. So what is church? Well, the part of the problem is when we read in our Bible, regardless of what translation you're going, it usually uses the word church. And when we hear the word church, we usually generally think a place, a name, an event, somewhere that I go. But the word church in the scripture in the New Testament, the word that's used is ekklesia. That's the Greek word that's used. And ekklesia means fellowship. It means congregation. It means a group of people coming together and living life. The reformers that back in the 1600s, when they started reforming what we know as church, William Tyndale, and many of you may have never heard of William Tyndale. Maybe you've heard of Tyndale Publishing because that's named after William Tyndale. And William Tyndale was one of the early reformers. And he was actually martyred, not for his faith in Jesus. He was martyred for his Reformation. He was martyred for the things that he wanted to change about church. In fact, the church is the one that martyred him. And here's why they martyred William Tyndale. It was because when William Tyndale had this passion, his mission was to put the Bible into the English language. And when he got to the word ekklesia, he saw that it had been translated church, and he knew that that was incorrect. And so he changed it to congregation. And congregation has a totally different meaning than church, because church means place, church means an event, congregation means people. Now, the powers that be hated this, and they did not want this to happen, because you can control a place. You cannot control a movement. You can control a building. You cannot control a movement. You can control an organization. You cannot control a group of people. And so William Tyndale knew that this was the case and that this word should be congregation. It should not be church. And as a result, he's martyred. In fact, he's burned at the stake. History tells us that his dying words were actually a prayer. And the prayer was this: Lord, please open the King of England's eyes. Lord, please open the King of England's eyes, is what history credits as being his last words. Now, God answered that prayer in an amazing way, because there are very few of us in the room that have never held, read, or heard from the King James Version of the Bible. In fact, whatever translation of the Bible that you read, I read from the New Living Translation. That's what I teach out of. And it's really, the New Living Translation is really the King James Version in a way that we can better understand it. It's very important when we see this statement that the church is not only for us, that I understand what the church is. And the church is not an event. The church is not a place. The church is not an organization. I don't know if you've signed up to get the text that I send out, and the text that I sent out yesterday was something along the lines of this. See, if I see the church as a place, then it's easy for me to skip it. If I see the church as a place, it's easy for me to abuse it. If I see the church as a place, it's easy for me to ignore it. It changes everything when I see the church as people, because it's much harder to skip people. It's much harder to ignore people. It's much harder to abuse people. I'm not saying we can't do that. We can do that. But it is much harder. It changes my framework. We talk about the needs of being in a small group. And this fall, we're going to have a huge small group push. And we're going to give everybody a chance to be in a small group for 7 weeks. And when I say everybody, I mean everybody. So everybody's going to be in a small group for 7 weeks. And we're going to have this push. And here's the reason small groups are so important. Because when you're involved in a small group and you stop going to that small group, you're missed. People notice. You know, there's a lot of times I go to my small group because I don't want to disappoint the people who are going to be gathered. Now, if I see that as an event, or if I see that as a place, then it's easy for me to skip. Now, ladies, hold on. I know this may be sacrilegious to you, but I've never mourned over skipping going to Target. Because Target is a place. I have no emotional connection. I know, ladies, forgive me, but I have no emotional connection with Target. How I see the church, how I view the church, how I define the church is incredibly important. If it's just an organization, then it messes me up in so many ways. Because if it's just a place and it's just an organization, if it's a place that I go to for Christian services, then it's very easy for me to become a consumer of Christianity instead of a follower of Jesus. So how I define church is incredibly important. It's a congregation. It's us. So it's impossible for you to go to church. It's incredibly possible for you to be in church, but you can't go to church because we are the church. And we have church this morning. And when you meet in your small group, you're having church. And when you have coffee with a friend, it's church. Church is very important. And here's the other phrase, this idea that church is not only for us. The word only, we talked about the importance of the word only last week, and only is very important again this week. Because the church, the gathering, our congregation, is it for us? Absolutely. If it's not helping us, if it's not feeding my soul, if it's not giving me a place to make friends, if it's not giving me a place to add value, if it's not giving me a place to walk closer with God, if those things aren't happening, and I'm not having that kind of growth in my life, then something is terribly wrong. So church, our gathering, our congregation is for us. We need to take care of our children over in the other building right now. We need for our kids and our junior hires and our high schoolers to go to camp. This is taking care of us. When we need to do that, we have to do that. But it's not only for us. It's also for those who aren't here. And we drove by thousands, literally thousands of people. You drove by this morning to attend our gathering, who will not go to church this week, next week, or the week after, or the week after, or the week after, or the week after. And our mission, part of our mission, is to reach those people. Why? Because we have the gospel of the good news. And God's kingdom. And we're gonna define that next week. But it's very important that you understand that the church is not only for us. It's for us, and it's also for other people. Now, why don't I do this? Why is it that I tend to keep Jesus to myself? Well, one of those big reasons is it's just an awkward thing to do. And it's a difficult thing to do, and it's something that we have to practice, and it's something that we have to be trained on. And we're gonna do a little bit of that over the next few minutes. But just a couple of 2 or 3 reasons why I think I think we tend to keep Jesus to ourselves. The first one is the fear of rejection. Now, just let me know I'm going to tell you what I did. Just something as silly as this. Okay, I had the idea of giving out the cinnamon rolls this morning. I asked my wife to buy the cinnamon rolls yesterday and cook them, bake them this morning, and bring them this morning. But up until about 5 seconds before I walked down the aisle with the cinnamon rolls, I was trying to decide whether to do it or not. Because I didn't know how it was going to go. Like, what happens if nobody takes a cinnamon roll? And I'm going to have to change the whole sermon. You know what? I didn't know. So there was this. How are people gonna? Are people gonna like me walking? I mean, what's the feel of the room? Because this is something that's always part of this fear of rejection, right? We have this enormous fear of rejection. So rejection is so important. We did a 4-part series on it a while back in the spring where we talked about it and tried to unpack that. We have this fear of rejection. So one of the reasons I tend to keep Jesus to myself is because if I share my faith, if I tell people exactly what I believe, if I share, they might say no. I could have had a cinnamon roll for everybody in the room this morning. There still would have been people in the room who said what? No. Would have still been rejected. Miss Mary, you could have made homemade cinnamon rolls for everybody in the room this morning. And maybe one person who needs counseling would have said no. Okay? So rejection is always going to happen. Rejection is going to be a part of it. But it's a fear. It's one of the reasons I tend to keep Jesus to myself. One of the reasons I try to keep my church to myself is because, well, what if I invite? What if I ask? And they say no, and nobody likes to hear that. The second one is this, the fear of not knowing the answer. The fear of not knowing the answer. Because somebody's going to ask me a question. You bring up God, you bring up church. Somebody's going to bring up a question that's really got nothing to do with their heart. There's a great story of Jesus, and most of us know about a woman meets a woman at the well in the middle of the day. And Jesus talks about her heart. Jesus talks about her soul. And you know what she does? She immediately deflects. Well, I've got a question about which temple is correct. And Jesus is going, listen, I know your heart. I know who you are. You're a screwed up person. And you're trying to argue with me about which mountain we're supposed to put the temple on? Really? People are going to ask questions you don't know. And here's what I say this often as a pastor. I don't know. I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine. I don't know. I'll tell you what, let me look that up. Let me ask around. Let me study that a little bit. Let me think about that. Those are all great answers. But it's a fear. It's a fear that one of the reasons I won't share my faith, or one of the reasons I don't share my church, is because of rejection. Other ones, well, what if somebody asks me a question I don't know the answer to? But here's the third one is really the big one, the kind of the thing that I really want us to maybe focus on a little bit is this, is the fear of change. And this especially happens in a corporate setting. When you find a church you like, and you like the way it feels, and you like the way it just is working, and it's just like, this is good. And let's don't mess this up. Let's don't get a bunch of people in here. You know, when we start building a bunch of houses up here, you know what everybody's talking about? Oh, the traffic. There goes the traffic. There's people everywhere. Da, 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 da. And with more people comes change. Now, some of you live up here. I've noticed you kind of put this when you go down the hill. You got that thing. You don't have to stop now. You can just keep going. This is a good change, right? You don't have, it doesn't back it. I'm assuming, because I don't ever do that in Tuesday morning or whatever. But changes. So one of the reasons we'll tend to keep our Jesus to ourselves, especially about our church and our gathering and our congregation, is we don't want it to change. Now, we all hate change. Some of us say we like change. No, we don't. We like variety. None of us really like change. Now, Chip and Dan Heath have several great books out about this whole idea of how to deal with change and how to lead people in change and how to think through change. And one of the things that they have discovered through studying of psychology and how we behave is that the primary reason we don't change is because we're exhausted. The primary reason we don't change is because we're exhausted. It's not because we're lazy. It's not because we don't have a heart for the change. It's not because we want to do something different or make a difference. It's not any of those things. It's we simply are exhausted. And that in order to deal with change, it takes an enormous amount of self-control. And self-control is something that you can exhaust. And they do all kinds of studies about it. And if you want to have a cup of coffee and talk about it or read the book, it's good stuff. But just trust me. One of the reasons you don't like change is because you're exhausted. You're tired. Now here's how that transfers to church. The gathering of a congregation. I like the way that it is. My life is changing in so many ways. Technology is changing in so many ways. You know, used to you could retire from an industry and be a consultant for the next 10 to 15 years. If you retire from an industry now and you're not in it every day, you can be a consultant for about 6 weeks because it changes so quickly. We're dealing with. In my years in seminary, you know what they never taught me how to do? They never taught me anything about technology. They never brought up the word web page. They never brought up texting. They never brought up any of those kinds of things because those things were totally foreign way back in the ancient days when I went to seminary. Because things change so much. And because we live in constant change, we are exhausted. So here's what we do. We want church to be the one place that doesn't, because it's comfortable. And if I could just go to church and it could just stay the same and it could just be this comfort and it doesn't change, that's going to be refreshing to my soul. And it is, because we're exhausted, because everything else is changing so quickly. That is an incredible strategy of Satan. An incredible strategy of Satan. Because he can't have your soul. If you're a Christian, he can't have your soul. But he can make you ineffective. He can make you to the point where you won't have any impact in your world. And if he can keep you saying, well, my church doesn't need to change, my congregation doesn't need to change, he needs to stay right where it's at. That's a highly effective tool of Satan to keep the local church, wherever the local church is, not doing its mission because we're exhausted. So are people going to reject you? Yes, so get over it. That's my pastoral advice. Are you going to know all of the answers? No, get over it. Are things going to change even in your congregation? Yes, get over it. It just has to happen. Now, here's another thing that we don't like about changing our corporate setting. And this is something that happens to a lot of us. However you came to Christ, however you became a Christian, that we can all go to those times when it's like, this is when God came real to me. This is when everything opened up to me. Whatever setting that was in, whatever style that was in, whatever method was being used at the congregation that you were part of the time, you were convinced that is the way everybody should come to Jesus. Because that's how you came to Jesus. Now, I know you don't sit down and think this out. Okay, I'm just telling you what you do in your subconscious. If children's choir is how you came, then you think every church should have children's choir. If walk down invitation is how you got up and you walked down to the front and the pastor shook your hand and prayed you, and you think that's, in fact, we've had people visit our church and I went and had coffee with them and they said, well, the Sunday I was there, you didn't do a walk down invitation. And I give my reasons why, and they don't ever come back. Because they are convinced the only way a person can become a Christian is if they walk down the aisle of a church on a Sunday morning. Because however you came, whatever you got, when God became real, that's the style and method that you really, really like. It's the style that you really love, and it's the style that you've probably convinced is the only way that somebody can come to Jesus. And for some of you, Community Church and Anthem is that church. And whenever you leave this place or you move or you go somewhere else, here's the struggle you're going to have. You're going to look for a community church at Anthem. And it's not going to exist. There's only one. So we have to understand that. We have to understand that the message, we'll talk about the good news of the kingdom of God next week. The message never what? That never changes. The style and the method change in today's world about every 6 months. Okay? And that's something that we have to understand. So I tend to keep Jesus to myself. It's awkward to share. I'm scared that I'm going to be rejected. I'm afraid I'm going to look dumb because I don't know the right answers. I'm not really sure I'm all about change. I want to give you a couple of tools to help you, just some real simple tools to maybe help us change our behavior when it comes to the idea of not being so stingy and selfish with Jesus, because it pained me this morning to give all those cinnamon rolls away. Because I opened that up and I was like, woof, I love canned cinnamon rolls. So I want to eat them. So it pained me to give them away. So I got to have tools to help me when it comes to not tending to keep Jesus to myself. So here's the first one. Invest and invite. And this is just kind of a mindset that we have to have, a framework that we have to have. Invest and invite. Now, the word invest is first. Invest is the most important. Invite is the secondary. If you invest in someone, it becomes much easier to invite them. In fact, the invitation doesn't become an invitation. The invitation just becomes, hey, why don't you go do something, because you've already built a relationship. You ever get an invitation to a birthday party from people you don't really know? I mean, sometimes you do, right? If you've ever lived in the South, you will get wedding invitations from people you don't even know. It's grandma's Aunt Susie's second cousin on the fourth side of whatever. We moved here from Poland. Okay, they're having a wedding, so we're supposed to give up our whole Saturday and buy like $100 gift and go. We don't even see the people in our life, and we'll never see them again. And if you don't go in the South, then you're on the blacklist. So you got to invest. Now, when you get an invitation from a friend invites you to the party, or a friend invites you to watch the ball game, a friend invites you to dinner. Do you have to struggle with saying no? No. What do you have to do? You have to check your schedule. Can I go? Is there something else going on? If there's nothing else going on, you say yes, because you're invested in that person. So what I'm saying as we do this, it's not walk up and down the streets just to everybody you see, hey, whatever. Invest. Figure out ways to invest. Well, what are some ways that I can invest? Look for 3 knots. 3 knots. Love this. This is from North Point Community Church in Atlanta. This is fantastic. Look for 3 knots when you're talking with people as you're going around looking for people who are not going to church. Something's not going well in their life. And something that they're not prepared for. They're not going to church. The worst thing you can do is invite somebody else who's actively involved in another church to come to this church. That is a horrible thing to do. Okay? Look for somebody that's not going to church. Not going well. Now, somebody may be in a church, and that church is not healthy. And that church is not going well. And that church is off track. Now, inviting that person to a healthy place is a good thing. That's something that's not going well. And then not prepared for. Great time to invite somebody to church when they have their first child. Because I guarantee you it's not going well. Somebody whose oldest child is now a teenager. I promise you it's not going well. Somebody that's just lost their job. Somebody that's just had a death in their family. Somebody that's just moved to town. They've just moved here and they've lived in Kansas all their life, and now they live in Las Vegas and they don't know anybody. I can promise you, it is not going well. It's a great time to invite someone. It's a great time to invest in them. Now we have these little cards in the back. We've got some new ones with a better map on the back that just gives, we literally have like 5,000 of them back there. So you can grab a stack. So when you're looking for that person, you see that person, it's not going well, they're not going to church, they're not prepared for it, say, hey, there's this great congregation, there's this great group of people that I'm a part of. Why don't you come with me? I'll swing by and pick you up. Sometimes the pastor gives out cinnamon rolls. And invite them. And then the third tool we can use is this. Pray for an opportunity. Pray for an opportunity. Pray for God to give you the opportunity to talk to your neighbor. Pray for the not well conversation to come up. Pray for the I'm so scared about what's happening in our country. Really, is your faith in the country? Because if your faith in the country, you're going to be gravely disappointed. Let me tell you what my faith's in. Can we have a cup of coffee and talk about that? I'm not saying that's easy. Don't hear me say that's easy. But it's what we're supposed to do, as we're supposed to pray for this opportunity. Did I mention that I really liked canned cinnamon rolls? I really do. And as a result, in our family, we have canned cinnamon rolls. We don't have them on Tuesday or Wednesday or Thursday, but we will have them on Saturday morning. And a couple of weeks ago, we're having breakfast on the patio, and we're having canned cinnamon rolls. And it's 4 of us now, and I'm back to the dreaded only get 2. And I eat one, and Eric, I needed some milk. I needed some more milk, actually. So I get up and I go into the kitchen to get another cup of milk, and I come back to sit down at my place where I'd left my cinnamon roll. I only have 2. I'd eaten one, but I had left my cinnamon roll. And my eldest daughter, my favorite eldest daughter, had eaten my cinnamon roll. And when I sat down, I said, who ate my cinnamon roll, or something like that. What happened to my cinnamon roll? And Madison said, she probably doesn't remember this, but this is what she said. I ate it. And I said, well, that was my cinnamon roll. And she said, I ate your cinnamon roll, Dad. It's what dads do. They give up their cinnamon roll for their daughter. She added, didn't you ever go to Sunday school? Because we're a little bit sarcastic in our house. We can't keep Jesus to ourselves. We can't do it individually, and we can't do it corporately. We got to get over being afraid of rejection. We got to get over being afraid of church changing because 100 more people start coming on Sunday. We got to get past that. Because my job as a dad on some Saturday mornings is to give up my cinnamon roll. And our job as followers of Jesus is to let the world know. Jesus had all kind of disciples with all kind of screw-ups and all kind of gifts, but here's something they had in common. Wherever they went, they told people about Jesus. And I just recently read this. This is pretty powerful. You're either a missionary or a mission field. You're either a missionary or a mission field. And if you've been following Jesus for a year or two, or you're 16, it's okay to be a mission field. Because you are. If you've been following Jesus for 30 years and you're still a mission field, something's broken. Because you should be a missionary, not a mission field. Would you pray with me? Father God, we thank you for the fact that you love us. I thank you for the fact that we can come into this place and we can sing songs and we can open up your word and read it and we can be challenged and we can be comforted and we can eat cinnamon rolls and we can have coffee afterwards and we can laugh and we can think. And Father, you've done all of that things. You've provided all of those things for us to experience in a daily life. And Father, our goal is we want to be who you've created us to be, and we don't want to hide behind the fear of rejection. We don't want to hide behind not knowing the answers. We don't want to be hiding behind change, even if it's just because we're tired. Father, we want to make a difference. We want to add value, not just to our congregation. We want to add value to our community. We want to add value to the place that we live. Father, help us all to get to the point where we're missionaries. And not just a mission field. Because when all is said and done, the goal is for all of us to be in eternity with you and to take as many people with us as possible. In your name we pray.